Hi there, and welcome back to Season 3 of Cyburst.
Wow!
A podcast about science, popular culture, and entertainment. We are your hosts, Isabel
and Ella. We are two science communicators and solar punk enthusiasts taking this podcast on a journey into hopeful futures. And we just wanted to let you know this podcast is for everyone, no matter if you're a biologist or a public servant. So this episode, we're going to be talking all about putting the punk in solarpunk. We're going to be chatting about what it means to be punk, how this is an integral part of the solarpunk movement, and a whole lot more. But before we dive into it, it's really important that we acknowledge that this episode of Cyburst is being recorded on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. Dowra Nuna, Dowra Ngunnawal, Yangu, Nalimanyin, Dunimanyin, Ngunnawal Wari, Dawa Wari, Dindi, Wangirlijin Yin. This is Ngunnawal country. Today we are meeting together on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge and we pay our respects to the elders. And we extend those respects to the elders of all the lands on which you're listening and watching this podcast on. Okay, so punk. It's one of the most misunderstood aspects of the solarpunk genre and aesthetic. So on the surface level, some games, books, TV shows, and so on may appear to be solarpunk, but often they're kind of just depicting sustainability in line with current dominant culture. So solarpunk requires radicality. It requires rebellion and or objection towards the current status quo. And this is a really essential part of the genre and something that we wanted to ground this season in. So we're putting it up top, and this episode and episode 2, we're going to be telling you all about it.
Yeah, we are. And of course, in our classic Cyburst style, we're going to split this episode into 3 parts.
Oh, yeah.
The rule of 3, our favorite rule. All good things come in 3s.
Mm-hmm. Well, we need a third co-host then, maybe.
Maybe. I don't know. So the first part is going to be all about what is punk and what does it look like in solarpunk. Then we're going to talk about comparing punk in solarpunk to punk in other punk genres.
Nice.
And then finally, talk a little bit about how we can move towards a punk-i-fied future.
Oh, so exciting.
Very exciting. It's really good to start with definitions. So Ella, what even is punk?
Okay. Such a good question. So punk is kind of this like global phenomenon. When it was established in the 70s, it was somewhat violent. It was full of rage against the system. It was dark. It was edgy. There were heaps of DIY components. It was fast. It was raw. And kind of at the root of it, it was really anti-establishment. But punk is changing. Punk has changed. Punk will probably continue to change because dominant cultures change. And as the dominant culture shifts, so too do subcultures such as punk. And I wanted to talk about this book, Punk Identities, Punk Utopias, Global Punk and Media, edited by Matt Grimes. And they put punk like this. Punk and its subsequent variants from hardcore to post-punk has always crossed borders and become assimilated within countercultural practices with local, national, and regional variations. So I feel like that's a really good kind of definition and explanation for us to ground this episode in, is that there's lots of different types of punk. It looks different depending on what the dominant culture is, and that can change locally, nationally, globally, regionally, etc. And I actually wanted, at the top of this episode, to talk a little bit about Russian punk scenes.
Ooh, that's interesting. Okay. Tell us more.
You may have heard about them. Recently, there's been a few things coming to the forefront. I've seen it on some of my socials coming up, and, it's been in a few news articles over the last couple of years, because Russian punk kind of started with black market vinyl records in the 70s, and that included distributing vinyls made out of X-ray film. Mm-hmm. So because they were illegal, people were finding other ways to listen to this music. Vinyl records themselves quite fragile, breakable. So known as bone music.
Oh, hang on. I saw a reel about this.
I knew you would have.
Yes.
So there were all these like underground markets for that music pressed onto X-rays, which were easily, movable, flexible, hideable. And I think that's a really interesting place for like punk to have started, in that region. And I wanted to move and talk a little bit about Steinholt, who is an academic who authored a 2012 article called Punk is Punk, but by no means punk. Definition, genre evasion, and the quest for an authentic voice in contemporary Russia, which is like one of the hardest article lines of all time for that to be a heading. And Steinholt brings a really interesting meta element into our understanding of punk, which is unpacked really beautifully for us, again, in Punk Identities, Punk Utopias, Global Punk and Media, which is that Matt Grimes edited book. And in it says, Steinholt, through kind of that definition, seeks to understand to what extent and in what ways are notions of creative autonomy dependent upon strategies of escape from genetic definitions. Mm-hmm. In doing so, he argues that in Russia, the dominant definition of punk is long since obsolete, and that punk is in a constant process of undefining itself and cannot be rendered into a neat formula that solves the equation of Russian punk.
That's so fascinating.
Kind of creepy. I know it's a little bit weird to like introduce a topic and then say it is what it isn't, but that's kind of what punk is a little bit all about. So I still think it's important for us to like wrestle with that meta definition.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of hipsters and like that, that kind of like caricature of like, if you think it's cool, it's uncool. So if I'm doing things you're considered that cool, then I'm uncool. Like it's a really weird thing to grapple with. Yeah. Punk is different in a lot of ways, particularly because of that, the driving force behind it, which isn't just to be uncool or to be punk, but what that means. And, a lot of those fighting against the status quo elements are really crucial there.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. Okay. Russian punk.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Just to throw that into the mix.
Yeah. I love that as like the start to this episode.
But that's a lot on like punk itself.
Yeah.
Isabel, could you chat to us a little bit more about punk and solarpunk specifically?
Yeah. Punk and solarpunk is also its own thing.
Yeah.
And I've got a definition or quote from an article from the Journal of Sustainability and Education about the punk and solarpunk. So, quote, punk evokes the rebellious and countercultural aspects of the genre. Fundamentally, solarpunk imagines an overturning of the status quo, like we were just talking about, challenging ecological and social injustices in particular. Punk has a long history of anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian, and anti-capitalist thought. Solarpunk proudly carries this tradition into the 21st century. And just a note here, I would actually also add the decolonial aspects.
Yes.
Are an important part of the punk. Punk also evokes individuality, although not individualism. By aligning with the marginalized, solarpunk resists the stifling taboos which promote uniformity. By depicting empowered, autonomous communities, neither the sameness of Soviet brutalism nor the false diversity of 15 different potato chip brands persist in a solarpunk world. Rather, communities are able to decide their own dress, speech, architecture, lifestyle, etc. And I think if you cast your minds to some of the solarpunk world and fiction we've talked about in previous episodes, like the monk and robot duology, like Ecotopia and even Black Panther, for the decolonial aspects, punk is really an important part of all of them.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to go back to from that definition was the individuality. So it's individuality but not individualism.
Yes.
And that's kind of, I think, what I was trying to touch on before with punk has an action and a purpose.
Yeah.
And it's a movement of a whole bunch of people who are individuals, but they're not trying to benefit individually. They're trying to, benefit systematically from this type of, rage against the machine and fighting back and action against.
Yeah. It's like you can still have this self-expression and individuality, like dress how you want, be friends with who you want, have your own hobbies, but change the world through coming together.
Yeah. And I think that's a really crucial aspect of both punk and solar punk. And whilst there are some really like obvious overlaps in punk culture and the punk aspects of solar punk, I'm also really keen for us to have a bit of a chat about specifically why the world of solar punk, and if you forget for a minute that it has punk just embedded in the name, why is it so well suited to punk ideologies? Because I think this suggests that solar punk is not just renewable optimism. Like there's something more to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to bring in here a quote from the solar punk anarchist from 2018.
Oh, love it.
That says, solar punk, recalling the punk in its name, encourages depictions of autonomous communities, often urban, with non-hierarchical organization. And this again is from the Journal of Sustainability Education, which says, indeed, many of the solar punk anthologies available in print are themselves crowdsourced, funded by them readers, rather than a centralized publishing house. So I think we can see that even through that one example of, you know, the solar punk books, novels, being crowdfunded, not being traditionally published, we see that these ideas themselves are served by systems of the ideas they represent. Like it's so meta.
Yes.
In that way of like punk is punk, but it's not punk.
Yeah, exactly. It's like even the way something is created is punk. Like the punk thing is created in a punk way.
Yeah. Right? So like kind of what I'm thinking is if you try to take the word punk out of solar punk, call it something else, but it still had all the exact same elements, I think it would still be undeniably punk.
Yeah.
Which is really, really cool. And that's a really, really important aspect. And again, it's part of the part of solar punk that often gets missed when we are looking to what might be examples, because to be honest, there isn't a lot of solar punk media out there. And when we're trying to pull from examples of things that kind of solar punk can inspire us, the punk bit is the bit that is often missing.
Yes.
And this kind of explains a little bit why, and a little bit like why that might also be a problem. Going back to the Journal of Sustainability Education, which we love, we're drawing on a lot in this episode.
That was a good article, that one.
So good. They again have this really banger quote that I'm going to read and then we can have a bit of a chat about. And it talks about 3 issues that solar punk is particularly well suited to address. And these are environmental racism, ability, disability, and representation. To say that solar punk can address these issues is to say that it offers a depiction of a future where these concerns are recognized and then tackled by the communities who are affected by them. In this sense, it can serve as a guiding light depicting a path to the resolution of these problems. And I thought that that's just such a good, capture of, again, how solar punk is so punk at its core. Like the problems it's best suited to address are kind of punk problems. They're community problems.
Yeah.
And they're problems that aren't going to be solved continuing with the status quo.
Yeah, for sure not. Which is, why we've put it up front in this episode and why it's so important to discuss the punk. And I can't believe people have not really spent much time on it. They're very focused on those sort of renewable optimism part, but not the punk bit.
Yeah, and it's right there in the name. And maybe we are kind of crazy for not addressing the solar part, but I feel like that part's pretty self-explanatory. We did go into it a lot in our episode in season 1, but I think the punk bit deserves to be grappled with.
Yes. No,
which is what we're doing today. So thanks for coming on this journey with us, listeners. And now that we've kind of got like all the definitions out of the way, we've established punk and solar punk pretty broadly and specifically, we're going to continue deep diving into some more of the specifics of punk and solar punk and punk adjacent genres.
Yeah, we are. So I might kick us off by talking about what punk looks like in solar punk versus what punk adjacent genres look like. So the genre of punk was popularized by bands.
So cool.
Like the Sex Pistols, the Ramones, the Clash, so on. But the punk in solarpunk derives from steampunk, which is another genre of speculative fiction that I think a lot of our listeners would be familiar with. And it explores alternative worlds or futures where steam technology and also Victorian technologies more generally weren't erased by oil-based tech.
Which is really interesting because solarpunk kind of arose from something that kind of directly opposes it, but also doesn't, because they both have that punk element.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, and then also steampunk is derived from cyberpunk.
Got it.
And cyberpunk are texts like William Gibson's Neuromancer, Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and of course its famous adaptation film Blade Runner.
I can't believe those are the same titles.
Yeah, I know.
That's so funny to me. When I first realized that, yeah.
Yes.
Mind blown.
Yeah. So the original dash punk subgenre of fiction tends to envision futures with urban decay and heavy corporate influence, which is quite different to solarpunk.
Yeah, which I think still often has that element of corporate decay, but something better sprung out of it. So solarpunk
exactly.
kind of starts from where we are. So something has to happen to our current systems to get us to that future, but it's definitely not on the same scale at all. Yeah,
and I've got a quote here from a French teacher and researcher talking about definitions of other dash punk genres. And they said, quote, the most widely accepted definition of dash punk denominations is that they take the technological and cultural paradigm of one era and stretch it to its limits. For example, the Victorian period for steampunk, energy sources are particularly important in that perspective. In both solarpunk and steampunk, the steam engine or renewables are central to both aesthetics as they drive the technologies that make them unique. This is also true of other more minor dash punk subgenres, such as diesel punk. Think Mad Max.
Oh,
yeah.
I think there's a lot to think about there, and very interesting, those energy sources being at the forefront. Mm-hmm. I know I said we haven't really spoken about that before.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how just changing, the focus of where the punk is, even just via energy source, which is a pretty narrow view of things.
Yes.
To be honest with you.
Yeah.
How that changes so much the punk aspect. And I think that kind of reflects and reinforces the idea that punk is directly opposing what's happening in that locality.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is interesting because it kind of means that each of these dash punk genres have to have started in a different place.
Yeah.
Like solarpunk starts from now, cyberpunk starts in the future.
Exactly.
Steampunk probably starts a little bit before solarpunk.
Yes.
Even though they didn't originate that way. We had cyberpunk first.
Yeah.
That's just a really interesting thing.
Also,
that puts that in perspective.
Also, Mad Max has come up again. What the heck, man? Why does that keep coming up?
Yeah, I never really thought about it much as a dash punk.
Diesel punk is an interesting concept.
Yeah. Isn't it? And it does keep making its way in there, which is, again, we've said it before, love to see Australian popular culture in there, and clearly it's had such a global impact.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that comes up as I guess a version of punk that is so widely known.
Yeah.
Because I think there are a lot of punk media out there, but perhaps this is one of those that is widely known enough that it can be discussed as an example and enough people know about it, which is a really interesting thing it must grapple with then.
And it's also one of those ones which is in super stark contrast to solarpunk too, where it's here's a future which is just wasteland, using all of these technologies has just destroyed the environment.
Yeah. Well, like we said last episode, to a point.
To a point.
And I think with things like diesel punk, and even with steampunk, there is a way you can get to solarpunk.
Yeah.
Less so with cyberpunk, but a little bit of a cheeky segue there into talking a bit about getting closer to utopia through punk genres, even that are like, you know, can be considered dystopias, such as cyberpunk, dieselpunk, potentially some steampunk stories. So I think they're like pretty adventure-y, optimistic. Like, but yeah, I want to talk about this idea of dystopias getting us close to utopias and kind of the use for these types of stories broadly in our society, but more specifically when we're talking about solarpunk fiction, stories, movement.
Yeah.
So in global cyberpunk, reclaiming utopia in Japanese cyberpunk film, which is a 2020 academic article by Sasha Meyerson. This article talks about critical dystopia as a work that rejects the conservative dystopian tendency to settle for the anti-utopian closure. So we've kind of got this idea of cyberpunk dystopias through, you know, specifically in this article, Japanese cyberpunk films, but cyberpunk dystopias that move away from their own setting at the story's conclusion, being arguably the most punk part of this now well-established genre. So I don't want to say that cyberpunk is dominant culture, but I do think it's kind of holding that at the moment for us, particularly in a Western society.
Yeah.
That when we think of punk, cyberpunk comes up pretty often. It's the most dominant of these subcultures. And the most punk thing, therefore, that it can do is to move away from its own genre at the end of the film. So, or the story or whichever. And it can move away from the film, or it can move away from that genre, you know, towards solarpunk, towards even just like ambiguity of change and a whole bunch of other things. But I really love that idea of like the usefulness and the why and what is that story doing? Like, can cyberpunk stories be hopeful if you go through this, you know, awful question mark dystopian narrative and at the end recognize that it was pretty dystopian and want to move away?
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting that this has come from Japanese texts as well, because of the whole, we discussed it in our season 1 episode, which is like the intro to solarpunk, about like Studio Ghibli films and that like sort of solarpunk aesthetic. And then I guess with these Japanese cyberpunk films moving from the like more negative to towards something more positive, I think it's a huge part of the like the cultural landscape.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that it's at the end of the film, so or at the end of the story. So most of that story is the dominant subculture.
Yeah.
So it remains cyberpunk.
Yeah.
But then it has like the little glow of something at the end.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of it also would like stems from that country's history too, like especially around the world wars and stuff and what happened there, and like they're like, how do we get from this like horrible place to this like new future that's more positive and we're all working together?
Yeah, in a way they kind of like tell us that what we've been through, you know, we're moving through it, which I think is something that a lot of other, you know, nations, regions, localities, you know, we're not recognizing that we might be in the bad bit now. And I think solarpunk as a genre kind of calls this the bad bit. It says like, this is the part we want to grow from. And I think that's a really hard thing to process.
Yes.
And perhaps with, you know, Japan's history and culture, maybe they've said like, we want to call that our bad part. So we need to start moving away. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I like the way your brain works.
Oh, I like the way yours works too.
Oh my goodness. We should do a podcast.
Oh my God, we should.
So kind of like going back to that article and that author, Sasha Meyerson, and talking about her work, that work was actually inspired by what was at the time a recent issue of Studies in Arts and Humanities, which as an editorial had guest editors Katie Stone and Raphael Cabo, who follow the arguments of Ruth Levitas in Utopias method, which is a 2013 academic work. And this is the interesting part. So Sasha's inspired by these people looking at these people on their thinking, and the thinking is viewing utopia as process and practice, something immediate rather than a distant goal.
Oh,
and I wanted to talk about that because that's so Solarpunk.
Yeah.
And it's, it's kind of in this global cyberpunk article, but what it's really talking about is something that's at the core to a lot of Solarpunk stories, which is we're not at utopia. Utopia is a process, and we're currently processing.
Yes.
We're currently doing, currently creating.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait. It's happening now.
Yes. Oh,
yeah. And I think that feels really punk too, because punk is about what are you doing in this moment? And, there's obvious connections with like the DIY-ness of punk, even aesthetics in clothing and hair and banners and gig venues to Solarpunk technologies and communities and transport and reuse of materials. It's so perfect. Like I can understand, and I hope that our listeners are starting to see through these examples too, how much punk is really intertwined with this genre, movement, etc.
Yeah, and we're doing it now. Like we are already taking those steps, those Solarpunk steps. Oh my God. Solarpunk steps.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really exciting, and it comes back to why we started with optimism, even though punk is really crucial. The optimism piece here is like, we're already there. Yes. Like the steps are already happening.
Yeah.
You can do some Solarpunk things today.
Yeah. Yeah, what's that famous quote? And I think it's by a sci-fi author. The future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed.
Yeah. Yeah, or even the Genevieve Bell quote of oh, it's so gone. Well, what is it? We make the future every day in the present.
Oh, the future is made in the present.
That's the one. The future is made in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're very complementary, and I love it. I love it so much. Going back again, sorry, I keep getting distracted. I just want to talk about everything.
I know. Well, these are really good points that you're making. So you've got to, spend time on those.
So going back to that guest editorial, these authors, Stone and Carbo, they argue that there's an intimate connection between utopia and activism, that the two exist in a mutual symbiosis, and crucially, without action, utopia is unthinkable. Without the vision of a better world, there can be no action. And those are words and analysis by Sasha Meyerson, who we started with at the top. So I love that. I love the idea of utopia and activism being so close together. That really for me is like the solar, which is the why, and the punk, which is the how.
Yeah.
And how, I guess how symbiotic those ideas really are in this way. So I'm really activated and empowered by particularly that last part, that without action, utopia is unthinkable. Without the vision of a better world, there can be no action. Although I feel like those words on their own aren't enough. They leave me unguided and full of energy, but without a target unless in the view of Solarpunk.
Yeah, those are some really good points. I now wanted to talk about how Solarpunk stands out from all the other dash punk subgenres because it's more grounded in the political criticism, activism, and hope, potentially. Hope in particular in Solarpunk appears just as important as renewable energies and renewable technology in differentiating Solarpunk from other dash punk subgenres. It really moves away from that sort of nihilism. And I've got a quote here from a Turkish academic. Quote, therefore, among the punk genres of sci-fi, there was none that offered a positive enough perspective until Solarpunk came along. The biggest reason for the inadequacy of these punk genres is that they continue the male-dominant language, culture, and schemes in sci-fi that have been going on for a long time. That is why they are unable to discern the problems of racism, sexism, speciesism, and global climate crisis, and realize how all of them are related to each other. For these reasons, there is a need for innovation, particularly an ecofeminist and critical perspective in the sci-fi of the 21st century, which I thought summed it up really well.
That's really good. I really like the idea that solar punk resonates, so much with us, particularly because it does stand out from the other genres, which can be more akin to other current sci-fi stories.
Yeah.
And I think even other stories, like we really struggle to find a lot of good examples for our early 2000s Women in STEM media episode, as well as our queer science episode. We found it really hard to find queer science characters in sci-fi. And we found it quite hard to think of female STEM icons from the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
Maybe one of the reasons that solarpunk appeals to us is because these are narratives where these voices are more in focus, and a variety of other interesting, newer stories can be told.
Yeah, there's more of the diversity in there.
Yeah, and in that there's more the genre is actually offering us, right? It's not just like a rinse and repeat. It's saying, here's something new. You probably haven't seen it before because it's non-dominant.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of cyberpunk, medias, I think it still follows, the male voice.
Yeah.
Or a lot of the violence.
Yeah, exactly.
It follows the exact current stream that technology can be seen to be heading down. Yeah. Oh, that's such a good perspective. Thanks for offering that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have another similar perspective that sort of builds on it a little bit. And this comes from Adam Flynn, who's from Arizona State University and wrote something called Solarpunk Notes Towards a Manifesto.
Delicious.
So, quote, and yes, there's a dash punk there, and not just because it's become a trendy suffix. There's an oppositional quality to solarpunk, but it's an opposition that begins with infrastructure as a form of resistance. We're already seeing it in the struggles of public utilities to deal with the explosion of rooftop solar. Certainly, there are good reasons to have a grid, and we don't want it to rot away. But one of the healthy things about local resilience is that it puts you in a much better bargaining position against the people who might want to shut you off.
Yeah, and I think that specific quality of resilience is really strong within solarpunk. I think it's really appealing to a lot of people right now for a whole bunch of different reasons all over the world, climate resilience or political resilience.
Yes.
Sometimes things can change really quickly and the current systems we have can't keep up.
Yeah.
Which is where systems that are solarpunk might be able to.
Yeah. And so I think bringing all of this together, what we've discussed so far, hear me out.
I'm ready. I'm with you. Let's go.
I think punk can go in two directions.
Okay.
So traditional or other dash punk equals outrage at the system inspires nihilistic attitudes and violence. So like cyberpunk versus solarpunk equals outrage at the system inspires radical optimism and practical change.
Ooh, I like that a lot. Yeah. And it definitely in that way is punk against the punk. If we're considering traditional punk as the first punk, solarpunk is punk even towards that.
And I think we are seeing a rise in the second option, in the solarpunk way of thinking and doing. Punk is transforming.
Yeah, as it should, and as it should continue to.
Yes.
Yeah. And as it should continue to in the future forever.
Yes.
Solarpunk probably isn't the last good idea there will be. I hope there will be many, many more that, use solarpunk then as a base, or like the solarpunk future we get to as a base to build the next best future for us. And I wanted to talk about how we get even to that first future that's pretty good that we then want to iterate on as well. So this is part 3 of Cyber's famous 3-act structure. And we want to talk about getting towards that punk-i-fied future and that solar punk-i-fied future.
Yeah.
Again, we are turning to the Journal of Sustainability Education. One strength of solarpunk is its insistence upon promoting and including the voices of those who are so often excluded in the present.
Yeah.
And I think this is really important as we think about going towards a punk-i-fied future and specifically a solar punk-i-fied future. We can't go forward individually.
Yes.
It has to be collective. It has to promote, include, uplift, amplify voices of those who are not dominant in the present.
Yeah.
And if we get towards a sustainable future and we haven't, a technologically sustainable future and we haven't done that, it's not a solar punk world.
No, it's not. With just the fancy renewable new technology, it's not solar punk. You're absolutely right. You need all of the rest of it too.
Yeah. So in this and, our audience, we know that you're along this journey with us, that this thinking isn't new, but we really wanted to talk about how towards this positive, more hopeful future, we need to get that together. And for example, we're recording this podcast on Ngunnawal country. We're in Australia. Indigenous voices are currently really marginalised, not just in Australia, but in a lot of global communities. And that's why genres like this exist. They don't just exist so that, we can feel better about our technology, but it's also so that we can come towards more of a reconciliation moment together and continuously improve on that. And that's why genres in this solar punk, hope punk space are so important.
Yeah.
And so too would one be that's defined in relation to listening to Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander peoples. There are lots of subgenres here, and of listening to Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander people and other Indigenous people by telling hopeful stories of and by them, that's one way to get to this solar punk future. And it's something that's happening in the now, and we want to keep it happening, and that's why we're talking about it, and that's why we do the acknowledgement of country and language.
Yeah.
And we are trying to head there.
Yes.
By including these voices in our stories, and hopefully too in our politics and systems at a national and then a global scale. And I just wanted to paint that picture of that future clearly.
Yeah, that's great. I was just nodding my head so much then. I'm just like, yes. I was
like, we're so aligned.
Yeah, and look, we do these acknowledgements of country. There's also other things that we're doing at Cyburst in our day-to-day, and that some of you guys are probably also doing too, to amplify marginalized voices, stories, and media. So through this podcast last season, we had several different guests who were part of the culturally and linguistically diverse people. We've had gender diverse friends on. We've talked about queer voices. We've also had early career voices. And in our very first season of Cyburst, we also did a few episodes on things like queer representation in science fiction, STEM role models for teens, and also the obsession with colonization in space. And here we don't want to preach to the converted, but highlight how these conversations are a really good place and a really important place to start, so that people can be informed, listen broadly, and so that they also go off and share what they've learned with other people.
Yeah. And I guess in kind of saying that, we've kind of highlighted how we're trying to walk the walk of solar punk in this media form, in this podcast that does get, distributed non-centrally.
Yeah.
And that's really important to us. And in saying these things, we don't want to brag, but we want to encourage you to look in your own life and be proud of, if you want a solar punk future, which I hope you do, of how you're getting there, because I think there's probably more things than you think you're doing in getting us all there together.
Yes, and sometimes it's honestly just about the small things too. It doesn't have to be you don't have to make this huge change or whatever. It's just all those small steps, and then over time we can get there.
Yeah. So this is not a moment of do better. This is a moment of celebration of what's already happening.
Yeah.
That we can get behind, because we do get to a solar punk world through creating that future of stepping stones that lead us there. And, hopefully with the toolkit of punk, the ideology of hope, and the love and togetherness of the community, that is how we will get there together. And that's where we wanted to kind of wrap up a lot of these punk ideas of this episode, with saying this is the path forward and it's doable and we're there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great place to wrap up this section on. Oh,
I feel so good. And you know what's even better?
What?
We're about to feel even better, because it's the good news bit.
Yes.
So if that wasn't good enough for you already, we've got some more stories that'll hopefully make you smile, make you feel good about the direction the world is heading in, because I think things are generally and genuinely becoming better for most people.
They are. And you know what? It's started. It's going to keep happening. You can't stop it. The good is happening.
The good is happening. The good is here.
Yes.
And I want to hear all about it as well.
So my good news bit for this episode is about something that scientists from Singapore have created recently. So scientists from the National University of Singapore have found a potential way to turn rain into clean electricity. So they've been able to generate power from water droplets falling through a tube. And so far, they've harnessed enough energy to power 12 LED lights just from rain.
Cool.
Yes. And here's a quote from one of the academics. Quote, "Rain falls on Earth every day. All the energy is wasted due to the lack of a system to harvest rain energy. Rain falls from a few kilometers up in the sky to Earth, so there is a lot of room in three-dimensional space to harvest rain energy." And we know Singapore is one of those places that's solar punk ready. We touched on a few of their sort of solar punk systems in our first episode. So I'm actually not surprised that this discovery has come from there. And I think this could be a model for turning much larger amounts of water into electricity in the future. And I can really see this working in places like the United Kingdom,
where it rains a little bit, I hear.
Yeah, just a little bit. But Ella, what's your good news bit?
That's so cool. And I love how much systems were a focus of your good news story.
Yeah.
My good news story is a singular case, which I hope will lead to more systematic change. So if you haven't heard already, the world's first personalized gene editing therapy has been a success.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So
no way.
In the States, there was a baby born with a rare disease, CPS1, that affects about 1 in 1.3 million people. And this disease has been successfully treated by CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which is a technology that essentially finds, it targets, isolates, and then corrects mutations in DNA. So on a really, really fundamental level.
Yeah.
So this disease that the baby had is caused by one single mutation in the DNA, which is about one letter incorrect in a DNA sequence, which for humans is about 3 billion letters. So 1 in 3 billion was wrong. It was,
my God.
And it was going to lead and was already leading to this disease that stops the body from properly processing anomia, which is formed in the intestines after eating protein. So, protein is very essential for human life, especially at that age. And this disease was kind of stopping that. And, it's life-threatening.
From that one.
Wow. And this is the very first time, so CRISPR technologies have been used before, but this is the first time that the treatment was personalized to that child's genetic information. And it worked. This child is getting better. They're hoping to move out of hospital soon. There's been a lot of good news coverage and press on this. I saw videos of the scientists talking about they had a 6-month period to work out this is what was happening and then create essentially a medication for this one child. And it worked. And that is on a one case level. But this technology has so much capacity for scale.
Yeah.
So CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which is the thing that went in and made that one change to the one letter, which, you know, would have really, really impacted this child's life, probably causing it to end very early. This technology can be used to treat a variety of genetic diseases that have more than one mutation wrong. And over time, it's currently relatively low cost. It's still pretty expensive, but over time it can continue to become cheaper, and the scale will really help with that. And that's also going to help with a range of gene therapies, not just CRISPR-Cas9.
Yeah.
So we'll be discovering more. There'll be more of a movement. It'll kind of change that whole spectrum of health technologies. And this technology is, you know, not just for human diseases, but anything that's biological, which is a lot of things, can be altered, including plants, say human food crops, say to make them more resilient to drought conditions, say to give us a more robust food supply because of climate change and into the future.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And I think it's super aligned with this theme of small steps can create big changes, which I love.
Yeah. So I think we're going to see more and more this type of life-saving medicine come into play, and is going to keep impacting a whole bunch of our technologies. And I think that's such good news. And I'm so excited to share it and talk about it. There we go.
Yeah. So now I think it's time for some questions for our audience.
Ooh.
Listeners, are you a solar punk?
Very topical.
In what ways? What are you already doing that makes you solar punk?
Yeah, tell us about the punk element.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to know, and we want to be more like you, to be honest. You're probably out there doing really cool things. So please let us know about them on our socials at sci_burst or via our Gmail.
And as always, stay nerdy, everyone.
Stay nerdy.
And we will see you next time.
Sure will. See ya.
Bye. Thank you to ANU CPAS for their support and access to their podcast studio.